Well, I'm joined by Lawrie Hooper here in the studio from Ramsey, of course. The EU trade bill is what we're talking about. It has different names, I think, and whatever, but I'm getting flagged from various MHKs that there's concern about this proposition of this bill as it stands, with the powers it could give the Cohen Group, I suppose. Is that how I'm reading this? And over to you, because I really want you to explain it. And I know Clause 16 people are mentioning, and it sounds very dramatic. What is happening? Where are we up to? And what could happen?
Well, it's all about process, actually. So it's not a very sexy story, unfortunately, but it's all about process. So legislation becomes law in one of two ways. Either it goes through a primary process, which involves a number of readings in the House of Keys, a number of readings in Legislative Council, and everything's scrutinised kind of line by line. You've got to approve every single clause, so you know that it's being read, you know that the detail is being looked at. The secondary process is a lot quicker. So it gets laid on the Tynwald order paper, it's there for 2 weeks or so, and then it gets approved all or nothing. That's got a few pluses, obviously, because it means it's quite quick. It's quite easy for government to get things done. The downside is it's an all or nothing. So we saw in October, this October Tynwald, where the housing order had some typographical errors in it. So they referred to a child as somebody who was at least 18, rather than someone who was under 18. Right. And Minister Harmer stood up on the floor and said, "Can I make a change to that? It's only an error." And the response was, "No, you can't. Sorry, you have to pull it and try again." So it's quite a rigid process. But it does give government the ability to get things done quickly. Now, where we're at with the EU trade bill is government is looking to get quite broad powers in place so that it can cover any eventuality with Brexit. So they don't know what's coming. No one knows what's coming, if anything is coming at all. And they want these powers in place so they can react quite quickly, so that they can basically do pretty much anything. So they can the powers that are laid down in the bill will let them copy any EU law.
They being
the government, Cohen at the moment.
Not Tynwald?
No. Well, everything will require Tynwald approval.
Right.
But this is where it gets a little bit sensitive, because over the last 7 years, Tynwald hasn't rejected a single statutory document. A single document just hasn't happened. So you've got to wonder about how effective that process is, but you put that to one side because we're not dealing with that process. We're dealing with Brexit specifically. So there's going to be a lot of law coming through, a lot of stuff to make sure that at midnight on exit day we don't suddenly fall apart, and that's fair enough. But the question with some of this law is it's never been through Tynwald in the first instance. And so do you really want your Parliament, Tynwald in this case, deciding on law at 2 weeks' notice when there's going to be hundreds of pieces coming through? Or would you rather say, okay, well, because it's Brexit and we need to do it, let's get it on the books, and then after it's there, we'll spend some time going back over it and deciding which bits we want to keep, which bits we want to get rid of. And that power currently isn't in the bill. There's nothing in there to force government to actually come back to Tynwald in, say, 3 or 4 or 5 years and say, right, we've gone through this process, we've decided on which bits are good, which bits are bad, which bits we like to keep, and which bits we like to get rid of.
Are you looking for a sunset clause or something like that?
Essentially, that's what is missing from the bill. The bill also gives the Council of Ministers the power to copy any UK legislation. Now, at the moment, the clause is restricted. It says anything to do with Brexit, but again, that's quite broad. The worrying part is it says, but we can change that, so we can add things to the list. And so this power actually lets the Council of Ministers do a lot through secondary legislation. That's that quick process that normally would have gone through a much more detailed review.
You are a stickler. I mean, that's one of the things. You are a man who reads line by line, and others have also flagged up. Do you think there was any conspiracy here to try and shove this through quickly? Because there's been 2 readings already, right? In one day.
I don't personally think there's any conspiracy around getting it through. I think government is doing what it thinks is right. But again, government is doing what it thinks is right for government, which is they want the power to do as much as they can as quickly as possible, with as little chance of things going wrong or being put to one side. And unfortunately, that is Tynwald's job, is to sometimes look at what government's doing and say, do you want to just take 5 minutes on that, or do you really want to do it that way? Maybe we should have a conversation about what might be a better way of doing something. And so the problem that we have with putting everything in a single EU bill, the risk you run is that you never have any of those policy conversations. You just have government doing things, reacting because it needs to be done.
So you do accept there's a limit and time limit that this has to go through in some shape, form, or fashion.
Of course it does.
But with these amendments, you get a chance to have a go at that, do you, to get these amendments in place?
Yeah, so there's a number of us have had a conversation already and decided on what we think actually might be sensible sort of time limits. It's all about checks and balances. I don't think anybody wants to stop government doing what needs to be done. Let's put that on the record now. This is big, it's unprecedented. We are going to be giving government some powers which maybe they've never had before. And actually, you've got to think, is that appropriate? And sometimes, yes, it is. But it's all about making sure you have those checks and balances in place. And the Chief Minister said as much when he moved the bill at the second reading. He said that he was looking at sunset and review clauses himself.
Okay.
So government have obviously accepted that there is a place for this type of clause.
Because technically otherwise, Coburn get superpowers here almost, and things could just be done without...
In a sense.
And this is where your worry is, isn't it?
Yeah, so the worry isn't actually about this Coburn,
No.
because these guys are going into it with, this is about Brexit, we'll use these powers and then we probably won't need them again. But the problem is when you put something down in law, it's there for a long time, possibly forever. And so we don't know what the next Council of Ministers is going to do, or the one after that, and it could be that someone wakes up one morning and decides, I really like a piece of EU law that's really big and really complicated, and I'd like to copy and paste that straight into Manx law. And we've seen it with GDPR, where they've just lifted the entire. Now they could have done that under these copy and paste powers. And
copy and paste power like that.
Essentially, that's what it is. And
rubber
that's,
stamping, basically.
Yeah, and that's the worry. Is not necessarily being done in the context of Brexit. It's about what may happen further down the line, and so it's about again putting those checks and balances in the law. So it basically says, well, this law is about dealing with Brexit. So Tynwald is happy to give you these powers in the short term because you're going to need some of them to deal with Brexit. But in the longer term, we have quite an effective parliamentary process that you can go through to get all this stuff done. So you don't need to worry about bypassing it, if that makes sense.
So where are we up to? Where are you putting these proposals forward?
Well, I've tabled them this morning, actually, some
right.
of these amendments. So they'll be debated at, not tomorrow's House of Keys, obviously, but next week's House of Keys is when we'll start debating the clauses of the bill. And between now and then, I'm going to carry on working with government to see if we can get everyone on the same page. Cause for me,
well, that's my question. I mean, how do you feel? Do you think there will be a...
I think so, because, like I say, they've already accepted, the Chief Minister said that they're going to put some of these review clauses in. And I think that's quite a good step in the right direction. So hopefully we'll get to a place where actually we can get all this stuff tabled. Everyone is in agreement that, yes, we need to give you more powers than maybe some of us are comfortable with.
Yeah.
But it's only for the short term, and it's to help get us through this quite unprecedented level of lawmaking.
And we started at the beginning of saying, conspiracy theories and sexy things, but it's not. You think it is just purely they hadn't quite thought this one through?
I'm not sure it's quite like that. I think it's when you look at a problem and you've got a solution to the problem, and that's their solution. It's maybe not the solution that some others would have come up with, but this is the solution that they're going with, and I think we have to accept some of that at this point. But sometimes when you're putting in something that works for you, you don't necessarily take a step back and think, oh, actually, how might this affect something further down the line? Or, how can we make sure that we're preserving the balance of powers between the executive and the parliamentary branch? And I think that's all that's happened. Is it's just they don't, as far as government is concerned, they don't need these checks and balances because they're quite responsible, and that's fine if that's their view. But unfortunately, as a representative of the people, it's my job to turn around and say that's great, and I do trust you to an extent.
Yeah.
But actually, it's my job to make sure that some of this stuff is in black and white, so that in 10 or 20 years' time, the next Council of Ministers or the one further down the line is in the right place and only has the powers that Tynwald was happy to give them in the first instance.